SOCA Global Outreach Office by the School of Creative Arts at the University of Lahore. And I am Jillian Rhodes. I am the Global Outreach Coordinator here at SOCA. And my guest today is Kathy Brew, and she is an award-winning video maker whose work includes documentaries, experimental work, and public television productions, and I'm sure much more. She has worked in media for close to 4 decades and has created documentaries around the world on a multitude of topics. She has worked as curator, educator, writer, producer, and again, I'm sure more. Her work has been shown at museums, festivals, galleries, and she is currently on the faculty in the MFA Art Practice Department at the School of Visual Arts in New York. So Kathy, thank you so much for being here and joining us today.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. And it's because we met at the Media Art History Conference in Venice that took place in September with a great gathering with people with so much media art history.
Absolutely, yeah. We met in Venice about a month or two ago, and I reached out after I came back to Lahore and said, "Well, we have to have an artist talk with you." So basically, when I was looking through your bio, honestly, I was just like, I hardly know where to begin with this talk, but I decided, if we just start at the beginning, so how did you get started in this field, and what has kind of been driving you throughout your career?
Okay. Well, as you can all see with my white hair, I'm a little bit of an advanced age. So I was a girl growing up in the 50s, when there was all this hope after World War II and things were getting modernized and all that. But what was a girl going to be? What were the role models? You were either going to be like a teacher, a nurse, or a mom. And I was the oldest of, and my father was a doctor, and you either go towards or away, and I didn't really want to get into that world, although I kind of regret now that I didn't pay more attention to what he did. But I went to a liberal arts school in New England and studied, I got a sociology, anthropology degree, minored in art history, and got certified to teach elementary school. Well, when I came out of college, there was a teaching glut. And thankfully, because I subsequently realized I wasn't really cut out for doing that. But I got my first job in a weird way with this educational publishing company that was making the most archaic audiovisual materials that many of you listening to this are too young to have ever been exposed to this, but they were educational film strips. And I grew up in schools. If they wanted to show you some media, you would sometimes have a 16 millimeter film, but sometimes you would have this film strip. And it was like a roll of film, sort of, but the material was on it, and it went advancing frame by frame with audio. And when the really archaic ones, they had audible beeps, so the teacher would know to click on to the next frame. Well, by the time I was working with this place called Sunburst Communications, an hour north of New York, it was a little more modernized, and it was inaudible beeps and a little bit of the beginning of computer things. But, I didn't have any crystal ball. I didn't have any 5 or 30-year plan. But in hindsight, I realized it was one of the best first jobs that I could have ever had, because we were making audiovisual media with telling a story. A lot of them were sort of, again, educational and sort of social kinds of stories, like CPR, how to change a life, or your emotions, the coping process. Or there was one that was there was a woman way back then named Karen Quinlan who was raising a big question about euthanasia. And we would hire a photographer who would come up from New York, and we would get models and people to play these parts, and we would do these shoots, and they were still frames, and we would then put them together in a sequence to tell this story with audio and some music. So that was my first job. I worked in some other educational publishing kinds of contexts in New York. And then I don't know how many of you have ever heard of an artist from the States who's no longer alive, but his name was Saul Steinberg. And he made a lot of New Yorker covers. And one of them was it turned into a shower curtain and a poster, and it was, New York, the world. There was sort of nothing west of the Hudson. Russia was way out here. And I'd been living in New York after college for 4 years. And I was married to my college boyfriend at the time, and we were both from this region. And we were like, we've done a little bit of traveling, but we were like, if we don't ever leave here, we won't. And so we took a trip to the Northwest. He could get transferred with his job, and we moved to San Francisco, where I lived for 14 years. And I luckily got a job in public television there. And initially it was more of an administrative, get your foot in the door, being an assistant to the station manager. But what was great about it was that I could,
Shoot.
talk a little bit about the trajectory. So my whole career has sort of followed the advance of technology. I puddle jumped over film. I never really worked in film. So in PBS, we were shooting on 1-inch videotape. You had to work with engineers. You couldn't touch the equipment. You made window dubs with VHS tapes, and you did time code editing on decks. Let's say you laid down 10 shots and you wanted to take the 5th shot out, you had to go back and take it out and relay down. It's not like digital editing now. At the same time that I was doing that, I was starting to connect in with the independent media community in the Bay Area, and people were shooting on 3/4-inch video, which was like the size of a hardback novel.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the camera was separate. It was tethered to a deck that the videotape of the size of a hardback novel was in. So if you're, independent filmmakers, I was often carrying the deck and with the person who was shooting, and better not go the different directions, or you'd
Right.
the same kind of thing of like at the editing, quite much more laborious than digital editing, which is really like film editing,
Right.
except it's virtual. And then the technology just kept evolving. So then we were shooting on VHS cameras, and then high 8, and then, super VHS, and then, mini DV, and, now it's, HD, and with, cards to shoot. And who knows, in the future, maybe we'll all be born with third eye cameras. But I'm sort of telling this long-winded story in a way to just say how much the technology is going to keep changing, but the process of telling a story is really the same. It's those skills of listening, looking, how you're composing things, how you're putting them together. So as I say, in hindsight, I had the first best job that just kind of followed with the progression of the evolution of the technology.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, just to see kind of, it's almost just like as the technology is progressing, you were just kind of going along with it and exploring what kind of new media and mediums were coming out of it. But
Yes, and see, I'm also a hybrid. So at the same time that I was doing this kind of work, I was also I ran a very unusual artist in residency program in San Francisco that's archived now. It was called Cap Street Project. And this was in the mid 80s, where artists came into a very unusual house and were making site-specific installations, mostly with media. So they were, again, all before computers. Like this one artist, Perry Hoberman, made an installation where he showed a film every weekend, and then he inserted with computer slide projectors, like projecting the images on the walls of the place. I mean, a lot of video and media installations. So again, I've been this hybrid, and I ran an art and technology initiative in the late 90s for the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council, when Silicon Alley was kind of coming up after Silicon Valley. And
right.
again, before galleries and museums were showing digital art and sort of championing the new media art that was starting to come out, because artists are often ahead of the curve with how to start working with some of these things.
Definitely, definitely. But so when you have like a new project, how what do you do first? How do you take it forward? How do you start creating it? And kind of what is so that's kind of at the beginning, where maybe it's changed over the years. Have you seen that your creative process, your approach has changed over the years?
Hmm. It's every project is unique and it requires different ways to sort of parse it out. But for instance, we made a documentary more recently on the Italian designers Lella and Massimo Vignelli. They were at the advanced, years of their career. There wasn't a lot of process that we could film, but they were here, we were here. So we went and interviewed them a lot and asked them to tell us about projects and asked them to tell us who are some people that you've worked with that we should go talk to. And I mean, Widows of the Vietnam War, regret to inform, when I was working on that in the early 90s, again, before digital, you know, talk about trying to get your research done without email and the web and, sussing out people. But the process is usually you start thinking about what are the elements you need to tell this story. So, okay, maybe interviews, maybe some process, maybe you're going to add some more experimental elements in it. And so my metaphor that is you start to kind of know the beads you want to collect.
Mm-hmm.
And what I would tell my students is, tape is cheap, so don't over edit yourself in the beginning. You can, some things might end up on the cutting room floor. You might take a path on something that you think is going to be in, and ultimately it isn't. But it's easier to do that in the process than after the fact. So then you start stringing the beads together, and then they start to talk to you, and then
Mm-hmm.
it's like sculpting in time. And you do a lot of trial and error in different ways, and it finally starts to gel and you think you're pretty much almost there. And this is often a problem with, I think, media makers, is like you could just keep going and going and it would never be done, and at a certain point you've kind of got to say that's it.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. And I think the knowing when to stop is its own is its own skill. And I think that's something you get better as you learn more about the art and the medium that you're working with, right? Is like understanding when do you stop.
Right.
Yeah.
Definitely.
You'll have to ignore the camera things going on in Zoom. We're using two different cameras for Zoom and the recording, so just go with the flow. I'm just letting you
Oh,
know.
yeah, yeah. Also, Jillian, just to say, your audio is a little bit like scratchy sounding for me. So sometimes it's a little hard for me to hear you precisely, but
Okay,
we're doing.
okay, okay, all right. I'll let them know. So, especially when we talk about documentary, like, you think about the filmmaker becomes a character in and of itself. So how do you manage that if you are also a character because you are bringing a camera into a situation, So like that's kind of, yeah. So I want to talk about that a little bit, like for you as a documentary maker.
Well, see, I haven't worked in big productions, besides the public television things. So I've really been a more independent maker, and for many years worked just exclusively with my partner Roberto Guerra, who's no longer alive. But I'm not even like with a production company with all the different you know um, jobs. I mean, it's usually been like just me and the camera person, and So we don't go in, or even with the Regret to Inform, we were a small crew too. It was, because it was a woman's project, we had a woman DP, we had a woman sound editor. The woman whose project it was the director. I was the line producer, and we brought one Vietnamese woman from the Northwest with us who was a widow, but not just because of that. We thought she would give us not just the language translation, because we were shepherded by the Ministry of Culture, Information, and Sports from Hanoi, but we thought we would get cultural interpretation, which we definitely did. So we're not going in a big, crew with a lot of gear and, overly techy setting up. There's a real intimacy with the way that I've worked with people. And, Albert Maysles, who's one of the pioneer cinema verite people, again, no longer alive, but made the films Gimme Shelter, Grey Gardens. These are classic in the early verite style. And he was a friend of Roberto's and became a friend of mine. And he was a psychologist before he became a filmmaker. And, we would go in with just openness. And a lot of times, if you were setting up an interview, people would say, oh, what are the questions going to be? Can you send them to me in advance? And I'd be like, we're just going to have a conversation. And we just went and listened. This was if it was interviews. And then if we're in location and filming, again, I've worked with a lot of different people, but having worked with Roberto, who started in 16 millimeter film. And so he knew, he would always make the comparison. Shooting an hour of 16 millimeter film just to get ready to go edit was like a $3,000 idea.
Wow.
And by the time I corrupted him to digital video making, when we were still shooting on little mini DV tapes, it was like nothing. But the point I'm making about with him, he had such an economy of filming because of starting in film and knowing the cost, that he could almost, he was like a ninja. He could sort of, sense something was going on. He kind of became invisible and just went to, pan to the right, or, he would do cutting points in his filming. He would realize I should, zoom out so I can edit from here. And, but when we would go, we just became part of, I think even my sociology, anthropology major in art history, just like a sensitivity to people and places and the difference, and adapting and showing the interest, listening, just being there, observing, not over determining. In fact, when we went with the filmmaker who got us going back to Peru, who Irish guy named Donald O'Kelleher, moved back to Ireland. He was like, oh, I know what and it was a documentary. I know what my closing shot is. It's like, if you want to make the gods laugh, tell them your plans. With documentary filmmaking, I know some people go in, I know a few people who still write. It's almost like the old-fashioned PBS, educational documentary model with a script and a voiceover and a narrator. That's not our style. We like to capture a place, a person, and let the story come through them. We never, like if I'm interviewing someone, I would always say, okay, I'm not Barbara Walters. You're not going to hear my questions. So if I ask you, how long have you lived in Lahore, Jillian? You wouldn't just say 2 years. You would reframe my question in your answer. So I wouldn't ever be on camera. There's some filmmakers, Hedy Honigman, a wonderful, very important Peruvian-born but Amsterdam-based documentarian who recently passed away. Her voice was in her films, and it worked. It doesn't always, but it's a very unique style if it works. So I hope that's answering your question. But
yeah, no, it does, because essentially it's not that you're not coming in with the intention of telling a story. You're coming in with the intention of listening, and then from that process of listening, the whatever the story or the film is made. So it's like, yeah, you're not imposing something that this is what I want to make. It's like, this is a situation that could be interesting, and let's just
Right.
see what's and in that way, I guess, because a lot of people, when you get them on camera, they become very different, right? Or when they know they're being filmed, they're so that it's always that interesting. I when I think about it, like if you bring a camera into a situation and people know they're being filmed, it adds something else which could be authentic and could also not be authentic. And so just kind of balancing that seems like it would be a challenge.
No, it is, but I will say, and I'm not to toot our own horn, but we would be finishing, like, again, especially if it's like an interview with someone, because you interview someone for a little bit under an hour maybe, and it's not all going to end up in the film. And Albert Maysles would also always say, when you think you're done, don't turn the camera off yet, because that you might be missing the last really interesting thing, because people just relax with you. But I'll give you two examples of the opposite situation. I traveled with a radio journalist back in the mid 90s to India, Thailand, and Vietnam, and we were gathering some material for NPR and for the UN. And we were interviewing a man in Bangkok, and it was about something to do with actually the AIDS crisis impact there. But so she's an NPR journalist. She had her 10 questions in advance that she knew she wanted to ask. She asked me to go with her because we met when I was working on the documentary about widows of the Vietnam War, and she thought it would be good to have me join her in this fact-finding thing. We were in India, Thailand, and Vietnam. So she had her 10 questions. I sat there, let her go through all the way down to 10. And she was like, Kathy, do you have any other questions to ask? I said, and I didn't say this to her, but it was like, hey, yeah, question 4, I would have segued off to a totally different question by listening to what that man said instead of going on to question 5. So, there's a whole different style, I think. Another example, and this is about sensitivity in other cultural situations. This was from the Vietnam Project. The American widow, we had Suan, the Vietnamese widow, and our Japanese American DP. So there was a good thing with sort of the Asian connection in Vietnam. Emiko was suggesting to Barbara, the American, okay, you're in a chair, you're the one asking the questions, but it's getting filtered through Suan because she's Vietnamese. Vietnamese face to Vietnamese face might be more comfortable, especially with what this material is. We were in My Lai, the place where there was the horrific My Lai massacre.
Oh.
It felt like the ghosts were rising from the rice paddies. Barbara insisted that she wanted to be in front of Suan. Again, not on camera, just to film this woman. Well, it backfired. The woman she was talking with had some kind of PTSD incident, and we had to stop filming.
Oh, man.
And I dare say, had she listened to Emiko and had let Vietnamese face to Vietnamese face be the conduit, that may not have.
Yeah. That's kind of chilling as a story, but yeah, it seems like things could go really wrong, but when you bring that kind of respect and listening, it can go really right as well. So it's really interesting. I want to ask you, and I feel like this will be a very difficult question to answer, but there's actually two parts to it. One is about the art and the projects that you've done, and the second part is about the technology. So over the course of watching technology advance and the work that you've done, what's the most interesting project you've done, and what's the most interesting development in the technology that you've seen?
I don't even know if I can answer that, because I think it's changing under our feet, and I might not be really fully up to speed with it.
Right, of course, yeah.
I mean, again, from doing like the way of editing that I started out with, and then we were still working with outside editors. I mean, because initially it was Avids or Media 100s, then it was like everybody was doing Final Cut. That's what we were editing on, and then it was to Premiere. I realized, again, with Roberto, the two of us were very complementary. I was sort of better at um, the structure, and he was better at the bells and whistles. And our films weren't like, razzle dazzle, lots of effects or anything.
Right.
And we would only go to outside sources for the sound mix and the color correction and that kind of thing. Since he died, when I edited the Following the Thread, the short film on Peruvian weaving communities during my Fulbright in 2018, I worked with a young Peruvian editor who I serendipitously met through my host organization, who wanted to work with me. And she I could rough cut on Premiere, but she was better at like the finessing.
Right.
I had a former student that I was my TA at the New School in the Media Studies program who teaches Premiere. During the pandemic, I thought, oh, I could take a free class because I also teach at ACA. I realized I don't want to be the one to push the bells and whistles. I don't, you know, we again, besides working with Roberto, when I worked at PBS or when you work with an editor, there's an aspect to having an outside eye that doesn't know the material. Two heads can be better than one. So now I hear people are talking about Da Vinci's the way to go. I mean, again, it keeps changing, and you have to do upgrades. I don't know that. I just think it's an exciting time to be a media maker, and it's almost like another kind of language that's becoming, it's something that everybody needs some level of fluency in.
Yeah, but and that you say exciting, but I also want to look at like the future, because if you're thinking about somebody who's coming into the field right now, this whole AI deep fake, the digital creation video is kind of starting to happen now, and this kind of you almost think that maybe in the future you could like type in a prompt and it could make a video for you. Like, what do you see in the future of this field? Do
Well,
you
that's why they were having strikes in this country, with the writers' strikes and the actors' strikes. I mean,
yeah.
people, and the guy who is one of the founders of Chat GPT, he was ousted and was going to go to Microsoft, and now he's been back reinstated, and the board's been fired. And they've been having sessions in Washington D.C. about either the fear mongers or the utopian people, and there's got to probably be some middle ground to take a look at this. So yeah, Roberto would have said we're in science affliction, not science fiction. I don't know. I mean, I don't. It's kind of mind-boggling. I actually am glad that I came through the time that I did with the progression, and I don't have the crystal ball at the moment, but
Right.
there are big questions to be asked, and yeah, deep fakes are way out there, and the Museum of the Moving Image here, there was a great project that I actually showed at MoMA when I was the guest curator of Doc Fortnight, in conjunction with IDFA's Doc Lab program out of Amsterdam. And it was a deep fake about Richard Nixon and making an announcement about the moon. And it was set up as an installation, and then it was presented at the Museum of the Moving Image here in New York. I think people are going to have to get a lot more critical, and there's going to be a lot more ways to have these conversations, to question it, and it's not going to go away. So how to harness it, but also be critical about it.
Yeah. It seems
And
like we're really.
Wait, say that again?
Go ahead.
No, I wanted to hear what you said.
I was just gonna say, it seems like we're really in the age of media, like it's media overload and overwhelm, from all sides and all directions, and so it's both the time to be a media artist, but it's also it's such an oversaturation of what's going on, so I don't know
I
how you feel
agree,
about that. Yeah.
Well, I agree, and I think it's impacting independent media makers because, I mean, there's a film festival almost probably every day, and how is the work going to be seen? How's it getting out there? And then, the consolidation with, the big streamers. And I know my friends, our Vignelli film, when it first came out, it's evergreen because they're no longer alive, and it's for people who are interested in design. And they can still learn about their work and their canon. But and we got a Netflix deal back in like 2013 or 2014 for 2 years. We would never be getting that today. They're
Right.
putting, they're putting all their money into productions, as is, Apple and Amazon, and so it's a very complicated time for independent media makers of how you get the work out there, and who are the gatekeepers. I have friends that are sales agents that are, wondering how to maybe mutate their careers because it's just not having the same ease anymore.
And for you, because you've mostly been an independent filmmaker pretty much your entire career, is that correct?
Yeah.
And so, but what has that brought you, being independent as opposed to, working for a big company or a big streaming platform? What has that allowed you to do that you think, being with a company would have prevented you from doing?
Creative control, independence, flexibility. And again, I have had full-time jobs that haven't been in the medium besides the public television things. I was the co-director of the Margaret Mead Film Festival at the Museum of Natural History for 4 years. I worked there 5 days a week for 4 years because not only the festival, but we did public programming that was related to art and science and how it impacted the museum. It was a big institution. It was stabilizing for me because I got that job after 9/11 when our offices, that's when I was running the Art and Technology Initiative for the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council, and our offices exploded. We had a studio program for artists in Tower One. I mean, I lost my job in years of intellectual property. But that job was a cultural worker job that got down to 3 days a week, which gave me the freedom to also do my work. A 5 day a week job after 4 years of sort of play it again, Sam, with not a lot of growth. I was like, if I want to keep doing my work, I can't have a job that's going to tell me I've got 5 days, only 2 weeks of vacation off. And I took the jump and the gamble to just be an adjunct professor and do my work. And that was in 2007. And thank goodness I did it. But yeah, I think creative control, just the bureaucracy of institutions and collaborations in bigger situations can get more complicated, and you're not, if you're in being independent has a lot to say for it, and the flexibility and the freedom and the creative control.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also an independent artist, so I feel you very much on that. I think I do the same thing as you. I associate with institutions here and there, but I do make sure that I have my time to do my
Yeah,
independent work
I
as
mean,
well.
it's not necessarily the most economically stable at times, but you have to make these choices and take some risks. And at the end of the day, again, as Roberto was dying, he would make a joke that maybe it was in the New Yorker cartoons or something. Nobody on their dying bed said I should have worked more. You know, I
Yeah,
think I mean, in the context of a job,
right.
and again, I just feel lucky that even when I had jobs, that they were connected. I mean, and when I first got the job at running the Art and Technology Initiative, it was the first time people said, "I love your resume. You've been all over the map." Because again, I didn't have a career path mapped out for myself, but they all kind of have interwoven in a way and fed my whole career. But I wasn't premeditated or figured out like the 5 year plan.
Yeah. So speaking of, you've been on this incredible journey and you've, created all this whole body of work, and now, now the field is changing so much. What do you see is next for you? What are you working on next? What are you looking forward to? What's cooking?
Well, there are two back burner projects cooking that I'm going to bring to the foreground. During the pandemic, we were on the screen so much already. I just wasn't driven to dig into them. Whereas I'm sure some people really, went pedal to the metal and, made new work. I just was needing a different way. And I actually got back into doing ceramics at that time because I wanted to do it with something tactile and physical. But these two projects, one, I don't know if you've ever heard of the American artist Carolee Schneemann, who's no longer alive, but she was a very important feminist artist early on. She won the Golden Lion in Venice in 2017. She started as a painter, made films, made installations. She was a dear friend and a neighbor here in the city and lived upstate in New York. Because we had equipment and she lived a block away when she was in the city, we would just go over and film with her. We would film her doing events. After Roberto died, I wasn't an official DP like him, but the cameras got smaller and I've been around a lot of people filming all the time. I can shoot pretty well, so I kept filming with her. We never were thinking about making a documentary of her. I guess, well, we didn't have funding for it. As Roberto would say, we have all the material to make it, but our time is precious.
Right.
But and some of the things we took on our own and some were commissioned,
Right.
I will say that. So,
Sure.
but so I have all this archival footage of her. And she, as I'm sort of noting, she is a very important art historical figure. Um, Someone did make a documentary on her. It's not very good. It has not very good distribution, but it did premiere at Telluride. She was very happy it existed. But again, the point is, didn't shoot with the thinking we were making a doc on her, and now she's gone.
Right.
So it would have to be so much with my stuff and then archival, and there's one film on her. So what I'm starting to think, and I have to start playing and sculpting in time with the material, is maybe making discrete little filmlets of the unique shoots. Like, okay, here's Carolee at her house in New Paltz talking about her cat, or here's Carolee at a performance, and here's Carolee at her retrospective in Salzburg, and because I think also in answer to your question about some of the future, I think that, like you pointed out with the media saturation, I'm not sure people's attention spans are set up for feature length
Right.
documentaries as much anymore. Okay, in the comfort of your own home and your nice home video setup, yes, but anyway, so I'm thinking of maybe looking at the material and making little filmlets and then see if it speaks, if there's some stringing together, or maybe they're just these isolated things, and maybe there's a way I put it on the web or something, and let people look at the material that way. Time will tell. The other project that we started some time ago, and I have all the material that we shot, and I started to do it because I wanted to do a project called Going Gray. And we started to interview women who do and don't dye their hair,
Mhm.
including all ages, young women who dye their hair to look more mature, interviewed doctors about the biology of it, people in salons, interviewed the doctor who's no longer alive, Robert Butler, who coined the term ageism and had a center for longevity. So it's really much more than like about hair. It's about ageism, and so I do want to go into that, and that I would like to include some more experimental, maybe animation aspects in it, and maybe it's sort of like orphan found footage. It's all kind of percolating, but that's how I dealt with my first personal video from 1990 called Mixed Messages, which is about gender stereotyping in popular culture. I had a dream, I visualized it, I was working with little girls on a theater project. They once sang the most sexist song for her audition. I was like, what? It's 1989? And then there were all these ads on TV that were sexist, and billboards, and I made this video collage, and it included animation, and I'm happy to say it still has legs, unfortunately, and it was shown in the Rotterdam 2020 Film Festival in a
Mhm.
program feminist films, and the Simone de Beauvoir Feminist Archive in Paris picked it up. So We've
Wow.
come a long way. We've come a long way, but we still haven't.
We've come a long way, but we still haven't. Those both sound like really interesting projects. Um, I think we're just about out of time. I keep these talks about 30 to 40 minutes, but
Mhm.
we think we've covered a lot of territory. It's been so fascinating to hear about your story and your journey. So I just want to say another huge thank you to you for being here and sharing this with us.
Well, I want to thank you for your interest and for, having this conversation with me because I think it's good for people to know other people's trajectory. And I mean, the class that I taught, I actually did just stop teaching at the MFA art practice at School of Visual Art, but I taught a 2-semester class called Autobiography of Place. And I used my video practice and had virtual guests, artists of all disciplines, as okay, in the painting, sculpture, photo session, it was Carolee Schneemann, or different artists spoke. And because my feeling was, for graduate students or younger makers, what's the next best thing to um, it's to hear from other people from the field and what their process is, and realize that you have to find your own way, but there are lots of different ways to go through it. And there's the fear and whatever, but it's helpful, I think. So I
Yeah.
appreciate.
I think so too, and that's why we do this series, Artist Talks, to help the students here just and anyone who watches it, just see different artists and how they do their work and what their processes are and what they think, and how they approach their work. So, thank you so much, Kathy. I'm sure we'll be in touch soon,
Sure.
but thank you for being
Thank
here.
you, and very nice to see you virtually after meeting you in person in Venice, Jillian. So
Yes,
thanks.
likewise. Great to see you.
Happy